the Slomer here is establishing is, wait a minute, sexual relations is not a big deal. The Torah does not discourage sexual relations outside of the boundaries of, adultery and incest, etc. Right? But otherwise, two consenting adults. On the contrary, this is a human divine expression, and in Jewish tradition, sexuality is condoned and not condemned. There is no celibacy. Celibacy is actually forbidden. Every every now and then in the Torah, there's a story that for many of us is disturbing because of perhaps violent content. Basically, not stories that we would have shared with our kids at bedtime or at any time. And Parshat Balak is one of those times. There is a story here of Pinchas, who he sees, he's witnessing together with the other leaders of the people, Moses, Aaron, and the elders, a man, an Israelite man who has engaged in a relationship with a Midianite woman, and that is in the context of engaging with having intimate relations with Midianites, and also joining in their worship rituals, idol worship. And that is it's an affront. It's a challenge to to the new Israelite people in the desert and the new religion, and the commitment, the collective commitment that they made to worship the one invisible higher power of all universes, and as such to avoid narrowing their perspective or their spiritual energies in what's called idol worship, basically, in giving natural or material objects but divine power, and then worshiping idols as such, statues and images. And there is a man, a leader among Israel, who is basically ignoring and provoking, and he brings his his lover into the camp to spite in front of everybody after he had been worshiping with her. And he goes into the tent to have conjugal relations with her. Pinchas takes a spear, goes into the tent, and stabs both of them in the middle of intercourse and kills both. A very difficult story. And the Slonemer here draws obviously another beautiful, delicious lesson out of that, and let's go right to it. I just want to acknowledge that as I'm going into this lesson, I'm going into it with some trepidation because it's sensitive. The story itself is sensitive, the sexual connotation is sensitive to many of us, and I will try to be as clear, and hope that you will take the teaching in the spirit it's given, and that I would be clear enough so you would understand the teaching in the manner that it's being conveyed. So let's jump right into the slumber. וישב ישראל בשיטים ויחל העם לזנות וגומר. And Israel, this is a quote from the Parsha, and the people of Israel were camped at a place called Shittim, and they began to have conjugal relations, sex with their neighboring Midianites. Va'itzmad Israel Baal Peor, and they attached themselves to the god named Baal Peor, the idol named Baal Peor, who was a Midianite and Moabite god. Vaycharaf Adonai b'Yisrael, and God's wrath arose against Israel. So this is not the story itself. This is sort of like the summary in the Torah. That is the one sentence where the Torah is summarizing the condition, which is obviously upsetting to the spiritual order, to God of the time. And let's continue. Thus, there were two different transgressions, as stated by this verse. Hachet shel Baal Peor, the transgression of worshiping Baal Peor, the idol, v'chet shel bnot Moav, and the transgression of engaging sexually with the daughters of Moab. And for here we learn that the main, in other words, the question is, what is the main transgression? You have two transgressions, but what is the transgression that got God so angry, as it were? Was it the idol worship, or was it the intimate relations with the Midianites and Moabites? כדכתוב המוכה ביום המגפה על דבר פאור. וכן כתיב, הרגו איש הרשע ונצמדים לבעל פאור. And he's saying the answer is right there. On the day of the plague that was brought about, the incident with Baal Peor. וכן כתיב, הרגו איש הרשע ונצמדים לבעל פאור. And then I guess the Israelite moral police, if you will, executed those who worshipped Baal Peor. From here we learn that the main transgression was the worship of Baal Peor. So that is important because והנה מסירות הנפש של פנחס הייתה על דבר החטא של זנות בנות מואב. But what triggered the extreme act of Pinchas, who killed both the Israelite man and his Moabite lover? It was triggered by that intimate relationship. And this needs, this needs some reconciliation, some explanation. It doesn't stand to reason, says the Stonimer. מדוע היה מסירת נפש על חטא בנות מואב ולא על עיקר החטא של בעל פאור? Why would Pinchas take such an extreme measure against people who are just making love, which was not the primary transgression? Why would he not take an extreme act against somebody who's in the act of worshiping an idol? והרי גם עצם האיסור של בעל פאור חמור יותר מאיסור בועל ארמית. We know that the prohibition to worship an idol is much more severe than the prohibition to have relations with a non-Jew. כמו שכתב הרמב"ם, as the Rambam says, he brings another proof text to that, שלא עשה תורה derech znut. The Torah never forbade having sexual relations with anybody else, as such, as an instruction. I mean, it's implied here in the story, but the Torah doesn't say. The Torah has a lot of sexual rules, incest and adultery, but not, but outside of those rules, sexuality is encouraged. The Torah does not discourage sexuality. This is not part of Jewish tradition. So what's the big deal? Well, there are late regulations that were set by the Sofrim. So yes, if somebody is um, is engaging with sexuality that's not proper but not forbidden, you can give them a light punishment. But the point is, ואילו חטא בעל פאור שהוא עבודה זרה, יש בו חיוב מיתה. Whatever the case is with sexual relations, it doesn't compare to the transgression of worshiping an idol, which according to the Torah is on the pain of death. Capital punishment applies to it. It's that severe. Obviously, one could ask, well, why does worshiping an idol deserve the pain of death? Never mind. That is the Torah standard. And what I want to establish, what the Somer here is establishing, is wait a minute. Sexual relations is not a big deal. The Torah does not discourage sexual relations outside of the boundaries of adultery and incest, etc. But otherwise, two consenting adults. On the contrary, this is a human divine expression, and in Jewish tradition, sexuality is condoned and not condemned. There is no celibacy. Celibacy is actually forbidden. So, how come this couple meets the wrath of Pinchas on a transgression that is really considered in the context of the Jewish legal system minor compared to idolatry? So let's continue. ויש לומר העניין, דהנה כמקובל מרבותינו הקדושים עניין האמונה ועניין הקדושה הם בית היסודות של עבודת השם. Okay, so he says, let's go to the foundations of the spiritual system of spiritual practice in our tradition. And it is as follows, that the two foundations of Jewish spirituality are spiritual trust. I'm purposefully not using the word faith because it has all kind of connotations that really are not relevant to this discussion. But I want to narrow faith or belief to spiritual trust, to spiritual conviction. And the second is holiness or sanctity. These are the two foundations of the spiritual system in Jewish tradition. One is spiritual conviction, knowing and trusting and assuming the spiritual dimension of life and our obligation to, or our calling to open up to it and to connect with it and develop a skillfulness in that area. Binyan Kedusha and holiness. And here, Kedusha has a very a special connotation, as you will see in a moment. שכאשר יהודי מתעלה בהם, הרי הוא מתעלה בכל התורה ובכל המצוות. When a person excels, evolves, develops in these two fundamental realms of spiritual conviction and sanctity, then a person is raising or is rising and strengthening his or her standing in the whole spiritual system, in all of Torah and all of mitzvot. So, in other words, all of one's spiritual life is raised when a person can master these two realms, spiritual conviction and the spiritual and sanctity. Sanctity here is in the connotation of sexuality. And you'll see, we'll build the case for that in a moment. So, holiness and sexuality, if one can master holiness in one's sexual conduct, that also raises all of one's spiritual life, everything. All of Torah, all of practice, everything rises. So what does holiness, Kedusha, have to do with sexuality? We'll get to that in a moment. וכשפוגם בהם, הרי הוא פוגם בכל ענייני התורה. And when one defiles, when one pollutes those two areas, the chakras of the mind, the sephirot of the mind, and the sephira of the groin, when one pollutes those, everything else, all of spiritual life is thus polluted. והנה בעניין האמונה, הרי כוח האמונה מושרש ביהודי וטבוע בדמו. And the Sotomer says, and in the realm of spiritual conviction, of mental, of consciousness, of spiritual consciousness, that potential is rooted in the nature, in the blood of a Jew. As the Holy One said to Moses, Banai ma'aminim, this is from Midrash, my children are faithful, my children are faithful, meaning they have strong spiritual conviction, which this internal, inherent force we have, Abraham and Sarah, our original ancestors, who have rooted that into our spiritual DNA for all generations to come. So each one of us, Jews, and this obviously also extends to others, you know that I see anything that we learn about us as Jews as a template for all spiritual seekers from all persuasions. ורבותינו הקדושים אמרו כי אף בשעה שיהודי אינו מרגיש את האמונה, צריך להאמין כי הוא מאמין. And as our holy sages say that even when a Jew, when a person does not feel the sense of spiritual conviction, spiritual faith, spiritual connection, when it's not experienced, a person nevertheless should believe that they feel it. Le'amin shu ma'amin. And this is where the realm of belief, of concept comes in. Sometimes I don't feel my spirituality. I'm just not there. You know, my mind is not expanded, it's contracted. So I have the memory. And I can say, oh, I believe, or I used to feel it, and I have that memory, therefore I believe that it's a truth, even though I'm not connected with that truth right now. And that's where belief is belief is a double-edged sword, which we're not going to get into right now, because there's always the danger of defaulting to belief and neglecting the alive spiritual experience. But nevertheless, even when I'm disconnected, the Sotomer is suggesting that one should nevertheless remember and go on that memory. I know that I have spiritual conviction. There is a greater reality. Because in that moment, it's only clouds that are obscuring the light of spiritual conviction. But deep inside, a person does know. And sometimes that depth is just inaccessible at moments. Because a Jew just has that inherently in your spiritual DNA. And I believe that all people have spirituality inherent in their DNA. I remember once visiting a Sufi mosque, and with a delegation actually of congregants from my then congregation many years ago, and the Sufi sheikh talked about Islam and and the great ideals and spiritual wisdom of Islam. But then he made a statement that went as follows. He said, actually, every person in the world is a Muslim. They just don't know it yet. So obviously you could see that rubbed us the wrong way a little bit. There we were a Jewish delegation from a congregation, and he tells us that we're really Muslims, and so we just haven't woken up to that yet. On the other hand, to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, I'm sure he did not mean to offend, but it was just his enthusiasm and his deep conviction in the wisdom of his own faith. So I want to say, just like he believes that everybody, is a Muslim in that deeper Sufi sense, I believe that every Jew has an inherent spirituality, and so do all people. But, and this is now where it gets interesting, where the Slonimer is, is being, I think, both beautiful and daring, that we become doubtful and we fall from that level of spiritual conviction when our holiness is polluted. And by holiness he means, let me read the Hebrew, שנופלים חס וחלילה אצל יהודי סיבתם ושורשם מחמת פגמים בענייני קדושה. Corruptions or pollutions in matters of sanctity. פגם הברית שתחילתו במוח הדעת. And this is the defilement of the covenant, and the covenant here is referring to circumcision or to the sexual organ. שתחילתו במוח הדעת, which begins in the state of mind of da'at, knowledge. Now, that knowledge, let's take this a step further into the mystical perspective. As it is written, and Adam, the first man, knew Yada, Eve, his lover, his partner. So the sexual relationship, intimacy in Hebrew is called knowing. And intellectual or consciousness, intellectual mental knowledge is also called knowing. Both those realms are connected. The knowing of the sexual organs and the knowing of the mind are interconnected in Kabbalah. Thus, when there's a lowering of the vibrational level at the groin level, or what's called the Yesod Sephira, there's a diminishment of knowing on the mental level. So you see the connection. And when the consciousness of sanctity, of holiness, at the physical level, which is sexuality, then spiritual conviction is also diminished. It's a very interesting, very profound claim. ומרומז בדבר הקדוש ברוך הוא אל הנחש, ראש הסטרא האחרא, הוא ישופך ראש ואתה תשופנו עקב, הוא ישופך ראש. Okay, so referring here to the conversation between the Holy One, blessed be, and the snake in the story of the original, what's called the original transgression, where the snake tempts Eve to eat from the apple, and Eve tempts Adam to eat from the apple, and they're all punished and cast out of the Garden of Eden. And God speaks to the snake and says, your punishment is that in the world, hu yeshufcha rosh, the human being is going to cut off your head, v'ata teshufenu akev, and you will be biting his heel. So he says that is teaching us that the human excels in the head, the willpower, the mental clarity, spiritual conviction, sight, insight, right? Intuition. That all comes from the mental sphere, the mental sephira, and that is the area in which the human excels, Adam excels. But the snake, which is a symbol for challenge, for pitfall, right, for the opposing forces, Kabbalistically, bites you in your heel, and the heel is symbolic for the lower sephira. In other words, heel and groin and sexuality here, it's the lowest chakra, the lowest sephira um, of the spiritual system, and that's where the challenge is going to. That's where the snake, or the archetype of challenge, is going to challenge the human by bringing corruption into the potential for sexual sanctity. And from that perspective, says Astronomer, let's read again what happens in this whole dynamic of the men, the Israelite men, who are forming sexual relations with the Moabites, who cannot join them in sanctifying their own spirituality, but rather are pulling them into a lower level of spirituality, which is idol worship. So it's written here in this particular story that the people began to engage sexually with the Moabites and Midianites. And as a result, they then attached themselves to the idol Baal Peor. The first weakness, or the first diminishment, was through an unconscious, undeliberate sexual engagement. And this was the scheme of Bilam, the sorcerer, who knew that the only way for him to diminish their connection to the Holy One was through somehow touching, somehow affecting their sexual sphere. And that's what he did. So he encouraged the Moabite Midianite ladies to engage with the Israelite men. And and this is what brought about the diminishment of their spiritual mastery and spiritual ascent. I want to bless us here that we become aware, become cognizant of the very strong but counterintuitive link between our cognitive spiritual development and our sexual spiritual development. The correlation between practicing sex that is infused with sanctity, with consciousness, with elevation, with breath, with divine force, with light, with peace, with connection, with expansiveness, as opposed to what's commonly known as dark sex, right? Holy sex. In our tradition, the basis for holiness is sexual holiness, and that is the foundation. That is that gives rise to all the same on the mental consciousness level, and from there the spiritual rocket can really launch. Thank you so much for sharing this very sensitive and deep teaching uh, with us here today in this lesson, Pashat Balak. I hope it redeems. If you are familiar with the story of Pinchas, who appears to, on an impulse, commit a heinous act of murder, if this can bring a little bit more of a softer edge and a deeper curiosity about the Kabbalistic message, the difficulty of this Torah story notwithstanding. Um, Let us walk into our day with the consciousness of purity, of elevation, and also mastery on both the groin and the mind level. May we so be blessed. I'm Rabbi Ruben Modik with Hebrew Learning Circles and Makom Halev Community here in Nyack, New York. Please like, much appreciated. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's a red button that says subscribes in the bottom right of the video frame. If you would click that, we would be much delighted to have you as a regular student and connected with our cyber yeshiva here. With that, many blessings and shalom for now.